All right. He's watching the chemical weapons one. All right. Hopefully, this is coming through. This is going to be our first time we've ever tried this. So, guaranteed. Let me turn my volume down on my computer so I'm not getting feedback. Guaranteed, the first time you try anything with technology, there will be problems. I am noticing that I have a significant lag between what I am recording and what is currently going on YouTube. So, this will be interesting to see how this turns out. Yep. Okay, yeah, looks like we are good to go. Okay, well, what we're going to talk about today is we are going to talk about the cardiovascular system. Specifically, we're going to take a look at the heart. And if you're just joining us, like I said earlier, this is going to be the first time that I've ever tried to do live streaming on YouTube. Was approved recently to do the first time I tried this from the classroom. I ran into trouble. Hopefully, this will work. I will assume that I can see comments as they're being posted. I'm hoping that will work. So if you have any questions, then you can ask there. And I am seeing an error message already, so good times here. Hopefully we can get this resolved. And okay, looks like we're up and running. So anyhow, we are, like I said, first time we do any technical things, of course we're going to have problems. I'm going to scoot that one to the side. Okay, so we're going to start by taking a look at the cardiovascular system. Like I said earlier, we're going to take a look at the heart. And so I'm going to switch my window here so you can see some of the PowerPoint presentation that we're going to go over. And again, you might see me pull in my other YouTube window occasionally to see what's going on. Okay. This is a little bizarre. I've got 3 separate windows open that I'm trying to juggle between. We begin by taking a look at what the cardiovascular system is. The primary function of the cardiovascular system has to deal with cell metabolism. If you remember, or if you've seen the videos on cell metabolism, or if you've had cell metabolism previously in your anatomy course, hopefully you understand what's going on here. Glucose has to be broken down into ATP. That ATP is therefore going to run the chemical reactions and all that fun stuff in your body. It's going to run the pumps. It's going to run all sorts of things in your body. The primary purpose of the cardiovascular system is to get the nutrients to the cells. It's also going to be there for the gas. It's going to be there in order to get the oxygen to the cells, which is needed for the whole cell metabolism, as well as remove the waste products that the cells are creating from cell metabolism. So the cardiovascular system, again, primarily is all about supplying the cells with the needed resources in order to carry on their job. So basically, if you think of a factory that's producing something, all the trucks going to and from that factory, providing resources to the factory, as well as cleaning up the waste from that factory, that's what the cardiovascular system's primary function is. It's a closed circuit system. We like that. If it becomes an open circuit system, you die. So we want it to be a closed circuit system. We want it so that the blood doesn't just spurt out of the body and you're dead. It's composed of the heart, arteries, capillaries, veins, and blood. For this presentation, because it is going to be the first time that I've done this, I didn't want to get too ambitious. We're doing a lot of cool things, but I didn't want to get too carried away. And so I primarily want to focus on the heart. There are other videos that I have produced. You might notice that I don't have the traditional background behind me because I'm not on a green screen. I'm shooting this from my living room. And we have other videos that are out there on the blood vessels as well as respiratory system, so you're more than welcome to check those out on the YouTube page or, of course, my website, mrfordsclass.net. So again, composed of the heart, arteries, capillaries, veins, and blood. We divide the cardiovascular system into two major divisions. We have the pulmonary circuit, and then we have the systemic circuit. The pulmonary circuit is going to the lungs and back. It is the highway to the lungs and back from the lungs. So what's happening here is that we're carrying blood to the lungs and returning it to the heart. This pathway allows us to get rid of our CO2, our carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is the waste product from cellular metabolism. And it's going to oxygenate the blood. We hope it oxygenates the blood. So what occurs here is the blood goes to the lungs. It goes to the alveoli of the lungs, the capillaries, where the carbon dioxide is released into the lungs, and you expel it out, and you're breathing in O2. You're breathing in high oxygen levels. The systemic circuit, the system circuit, the system pathway is the blood that's bringing, or it's the pathway that's bringing blood to your toes, to your nose, to your ears, to your fingers, to your everywhere, and back again. So the systemic circuit is going to supply blood to the rest of the body. It's going to deliver oxygen to all the body cells and carries away waste products. So we first take a look at where the heart is located at. Now, unlike the good doctor, we only have one heart. Hopefully you got that joke, considering we're celebrating the 50th birthday anniversary of Doctor Who coming up soon. For those of you out there who are geeks and nerds, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you that are not, I feel sorry for you. Anyhow, we have one heart. The heart, the adult heart, has a mass of between 250 and 350 grams. It's about the size of a fist. So it's about the size of your fist, not exactly my fist, but your fist for your heart. And it's around 14 centimeters long and about 9 centimeters wide. It's located not directly in the middle. It's kind of located off to the side. It's kind of located off towards the left side of the chest. The heart is located within the thoracic cavity. If you recall from hopefully your first lessons when you did introductions and you looked at body cavities, or as I call them, the body cubby holes, you had the cavities in the front and the cavities in the back. One of the big cavities in the front was the thoracic cavity, where you had the heart and you had the lungs. So the heart is located in the thoracic cavity, in the mediastinum. Surrounding the heart, we find it's posterior to the sternum, so the breastbone, right, the sternum, which is translated to dagger, medial to the lungs, so it's in between the lungs, anterior in front of the vertebral column, that's your backbone, on top of the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a large sheet muscle that separates the thoracic area from the abdominal area. This is a very important muscle in respiration. And about 2/3 of the heart lies left of the midline, so it angles towards the left. We have surfaces of the heart that you need to be aware of. We have the base, the apex, and 3 surfaces. We have the inferior or diaphragmatic surface, we have the anterior or sternocostal surface, and we have the left or pulmonary surface. So taking a look at the base is actually at the top of the heart. The base is superior on the heart. It's formed by the left and right atria. The atria are 2 chambers at the top of the heart, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's at the top of the heart. So the base is at the top portion of the heart. It is found beneath the second rib. The apex is the pointy end of the heart, and I'm trying to find if I have any images here that I can share as of right now. No, not yet. Okay, cool. The apex is the pointy part of the heart. It lies in the left 5th intercostal space. Intercostal means between the ribs, costal ribs, so intercostal between the ribs. So it lies in the left fifth and intercostal space. And it angles downwards towards the left, and it's formed by the left ventricle. The ventricles are other chambers of the heart, which we'll take a look at again in just a little bit. Looking at some other parts of the heart, the other surfaces of the heart, we have the inferior or diaphragmatic. It should tell you kind of what it's laying against, the diaphragm, diaphragmatic, so it lies on the underside. It's formed by the left and right ventricles. And then we have the anterior or sternocostal surface. Again, that kind of clues you in on what it is. Sternum, costal ribs, so it's the part that's lying closer to the sternum, again, the breastbone and the ribs themselves. Lies just behind the sternum and the ribs, formed mostly by the right ventricle. And then we have the left pulmonary surface, which is formed mostly by the left ventricle, found nestled into the concavity, the cup formed by the left lung. When you start to take a look at the respiratory system, what you're going to notice is that the right lung has 3 lobes, while the left lung has 2 lobes. The left lung also has this indentation, this kind of catcher's mitt for the heart. The heart rests right in that catcher's mitt area, into that pushed-in surface. That's where the heart is going to rest into, which is also why the left lung doesn't have 3 lobes. It only has 2 lobes. So, moving on, now we're going to take a look at the layers of the heart. And I was trying to come up with some academic kind of quote for this, and couldn't find one, so I came up with one from Shrek. Shrek, layers, onions have layers, ogres have layers, onions have layers, you get it, we both have layers. And then Donkey replies, oh, you both have layers, oh, you know, not everybody likes onions, what about cake? Everybody loves cake. When we're taking a look at the heart, it is not just one substance that composes it. There are layers to the heart, and it's really not that difficult. Now, I say not that difficult, and then I put this next picture up there. And this next picture makes it look difficult, and it's not. It is really not difficult. We'll break this down into the components, into the layers, and it really doesn't get that hard, okay? We have something called the pericardium, which has some layers, and then we have the heart itself, which has some layers. And we're going to notice an overlap here. So don't worry, we'll start to break this down right now. We begin by taking a look at the pericardium. Now, I'm going to throw a... So in that video, you get to actually see a heart beating. If you were to open up somebody's chest, if you were to open up somebody's thoracic cavity and take a look for the heart, you're not going to find a heart that you see on TV. You're not going to find, what was that character's name? Ricardio from Adventure Time. Okay, you don't have this heart-shaped thing there. It's a muscle and it's encased in a bag. This protective bag is known as the pericardium, the pericardial sac. It's a double-walled sac that encloses the heart. It has 2 main layers. It has a fibrous pericardium and a serous pericardium. The fibrous pericardium is a strong, dense outer part of the pericardium. So it's the stronger, more protective bag part of the pericardium. It's going to blend with the central tendon of the diaphragm. That's so the heart just doesn't flop around in your thoracic area. It kind of keeps it anchored in one spot there. Then we have, I backed up one. There we go. Let's go back to where I wanted it to go. So we have the fibrous pericardium. Yeah, there we go. I lost my place there. The fibrous pericardium, like I said, is the outer layer of the heart bag, made of tough fibrous connective tissue. It's going to protect the heart. It's going to serve as an attachment point. It's going to connect to the sternum, the diaphragm, and the walls of the arteries, and it keeps the heart from overfilling. So the fibrous pericardium keeps the heart from going crazy expansion. So it does put some pressure on it to keep it from going too far open. So it's not elastic. It limits how much the heart can expand with the blood. Then we have the serous pericardium. And to make this even more complicated, we break this down into two layers. Okay? This is going to cover and encase the heart. It has a parietal layer and a visceral layer. The parietal layer is just the inside surface of the fibrous pericardium. So it's the smooth, softer inside surface of the pericardial sac. Then we have a pericardial cavity, which is an open space between the pericardium sac and the heart itself. This pericardial cavity is a very slippery, fluid-filled area. It's there to reduce friction. So we have the slippery serous fluid that allows the heart to beat freely. So imagine this is your heart. Your heart is beating, okay? This is the fibrous bag. This is the pericardial bag. The last thing you want to do is to have that heart grinding away at this fibrous bag. This is bad. This is not good. This causes pain. This can cause death. So we have this open area. We have this cavity here that is filled with a lubricant. Okay, just like an engine, you can't have grinding parts against each other. You have parts that are close to each other, and you have a lubricant in between them. The body is the same thing. We have this lubricant between the heart and the bag, so we don't have that grinding away. Then we have the visceral layer. The visceral layer is a tricky term. Yes, we say it's part of the serous pericardium. Yes, we say it's part of the heart bag that surrounds it. But in fact, the visceral layer of the serous pericardium is nothing more than the outer layer of the heart itself. It's the epicardium. So it's the same thing. We just have two separate names for it to mess with you first-year anatomy students. But the serous pericardium has the parietal layer, which is part of the pericardial sac, a gap, and then the visceral layer, which is the epicardium, which is a layer of the heart itself. So let's take a look again at our separation here. And I'll pull up the PowerPoint. Sorry, I forgot I didn't have that pulled up. I was just me in the big image there. Again, the two layers of the heart are the pericardium and the heart itself. The pericardium is composed of the two layers. It's composed of the fibrous pericardium and the serous pericardium. The serous pericardium can be broken down, and let me see if I can get a better picture of this for you than what I'm showing right now. And nope, I think we're going to get stuck with me in the picture-in-picture. The serous pericardium is broken down to the parietal layer, the cavity, and the visceral layer. And the visceral layer, again, is nothing more than the epicardium itself, than the heart muscle itself. Now we can also see that the layers of the heart are broken down to three areas. We have the visceral layer, the epicardium, which we just talked about, the myocardium, and the endocardium. So taking a look at the layers of the heart. Three layers, epi, myo, endo. Epi, above or upon. At this point in your studies, you've probably heard epi several times. You've heard of the epidermis, okay, which is above or upon the true skin, the dermis. Well, epi, again, above or upon. So epicardium is the outside layer. The viscera of the heart, also known as the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, composed mainly of simple squamous epithelial over a thin layer of areolar tissue. Now, let me pause there, because this is a good point to bring back to the beginning of your anatomy and physiology. So whether you're watching this as an A&P2 student or an A&P1 student, we just said something that was at the beginning of your studies when you looked at epithelial tissue. Remember that epithelial tissue lines almost everything in the body. If there's an opening in the body, you can find epithelial tissue. Again, the exception to that one is the articular surfaces of the cartilage. So, for example, you're not going to see epithelial tissue lining bone, right? Where bones come together. You're not going to see them lining articular surfaces, joints. But we have here an opening. We have a cavity, which is an opening. And lining this opening, this epicardium, is composed of epithelial tissue. Specifically, one layer of flat epithelial tissue, right? Simple, one layer, squamous, squashed epithelial tissue. Then we have myo muscle, myo muscle. Hopefully that word has already got that association with you. So the myocardium, the muscle, myocardium, heart, the heart muscle, okay? This is the heart muscle. This is the part that gets the paycheck. This is the part that does the work. The myocardium is the big mover and shaker of the heart. Okay, this is the meat of the heart. The myocardium is the cardiac muscle. The thickest of the three layers because, again, this is the one doing the work. This is the one squeezing and making the heart contract. So the myocardium is the muscle of the heart, and specifically cardiac muscle. Now, every semester when we talk about the muscular system, I always introduce the three types of muscles: the skeletal muscle, the smooth muscle, and the cardiac muscle. And we talk about the skeletal muscle in great detail in the muscular system. And we talk about the smooth muscle more commonly when we start talking about like the digestive system, the urinary system, because those are more the muscles of the gut. And we say in the tissue section that cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. And I make a big dog and pony show over telling my students, who are hopefully watching right now, that cardiac muscle is only in the heart. Cardiac muscle is only in the heart. You don't find cardiac muscle in the blood vessels. This right here, this myocardium, this is the cardiac muscle. This is the muscle we're talking about when we talk about the histology. So myocardium is the cardiac muscle. Then we have the endocardium. The endocardium, tea, a little too late at night to be drinking coffee. The endo, you should be familiar with that term. It's kind of inside, within, okay? Endocardium is composed of smooth epithelium, and it lines the inside of the heart. Again, inside of the heart are cavities, open areas. These open areas are called ventricles. And again, once again, I'm kind of beating this horse here. Anytime you find an open area, anytime you find a cavity, anytime you find an open area, you're going to find epithelial tissue. So we have epithelial tissue lining the outside of the heart, and we have epithelial tissue lining the inside of the heart. So let me move this slide a little bit over for you so you can see it. Hopefully I can move that around a little bit so you can see it better. And you're getting some of my background here. But we can see the epi, the myo, and the endocardium. This is part of the learning process of using this this tool here. There we go. All right, I think we're back good. All right. Covers the surface of the valves, and it continues on as the endothelium in the blood vessels. I've said a couple times already about the chambers of the heart. So I've already said a couple times about the chambers of the heart, so now we're going to start taking a look at what we're talking about here. There are several structures found within the heart that we need to be aware of. We have the chambers, we have the support structures, and we have openings for blood to pass through. We begin by taking a look at the chambers. The heart contains 4 chambers. It's going to contain 2 chambers above, and it's going to contain 2 chambers below. So we have 2 superior chambers and 2 inferior chambers. The superior chambers are called atrium, while the inferior chambers are called the ventricles. And we have left and we have right. So we have a left atrium and a right atrium. We have a left ventricle and a right ventricle. So top and bottom. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood and passes it to the right ventricle. Deoxygenated. What's happened here is that this is blood that has been used and has been brought back to the heart. So this is blood that has come back from your toes, come back from your nose and your fingers and all this other stuff. So the right atrium is receiving blood from the rest of your body. It's receiving blood that has given up its oxygen. It's then going to pass it down into the right ventricle. Openings into the right atrium, this is typically a good test question. You might be asked, what are the openings into this chamber? What are the openings into that chamber? So it's a good idea to know your openings. Openings into the right atrium include the superior vena cava, blood in, inferior vena cava, blood in, the coronary sinus, blood in, and the right ventricle, which is blood out. Going from the right ventricle, the right atrium to the right ventricle, so going top to bottom, the right atrium dumps the blood into the right ventricle. So the right ventricle is receiving deoxygenated blood from above it, the right ventricle. The right ventricle forms most of the anterior surface and inferior border of the heart, and openings into the right atrium, right ventricle, include the right atrium via a valve, which we'll talk about later, called the tricuspid, and blood out through something called the pulmonary trunk. If the right side is receiving blood low in oxygen, the left side is doing the opposite. The left side is receiving high oxygenated blood. So oxygenated blood enters the left atrium from the pulmonary vein. Openings into the left atrium are the pulmonary vein, which is blood in, and the left ventricle through the mitral, which is blood out. So left atrium goes into the left ventricle. Oxygenated blood from left atrium, left ventricle. Openings into the left ventricle include the left atrium through, again, a valve we'll talk about later called the mitral valve, and it goes out through the aorta, through the aortic valve, which we'll talk about again in a few minutes when we're talking about valves. Now, the left side has to pump blood all the way down to your toes. So the left side has to get blood from your heart all the way down to your feet. To do this, the left ventricle is going to be thicker. It's going to have a thicker muscle because it's got to push more. It's got to squeeze more. It's got to be more forceful than the right side. So the left side is about 2 to 3 times thicker. The walls are thicker than the right side. So here's a quick summary that you can take a look at. This is a good summary. Okay? What I would suggest doing is making a note card. If you haven't made note cards yet, and I think I tossed mine all out because we're in the process of moving. We're actually in the process of moving from North Virginia back down to Texas. And yes, I cleaned out all my index cards. What I would suggest doing is making an index cards specifically on just this particular slide alone, where you have the chamber, the circuits part of the type of blood, and very importantly, the openings into and out of that particular thing. That is a very good note card to make, by the way. Very good note card to make. All right, moving on after I take a sip of my tea. Other components we need to be aware of. So there are other components of the heart that you must be aware of. You have the interventricular septum, the trabecular carne, the papillary muscles, the chordae tendineae, and the valves. The interventricular septum. Without knowing what a septum is, interventricular means between the ventricles. So this is some sort of structure between the ventricles. And this is what this is. It's a barrier. It's a separating wall. This is going to keep the blood from the left side from mingling with the blood on the right side. We don't want that. That is bad. And so the interventricular septum is keeping the blood on the left side, and the blood on the right side. The trabecular carne, okay, when I go back to Texas, one of the things that we'll order is chili con carne. Carne means meat. Now, we're not talking about heart meat, but carne means meat. The trabecular carne of the heart is a group of interconnecting muscular ridges located in the ventricular wall. When you take a look at the heart that's cut up, when you take a look at a heart that's been opened, you're going to notice in the ventricles this rough, ridged kind of appearance. It's a meat-looking appearance, and that is what you're looking at. You're looking at the trabecular carne, i.e. meat. So you're taking a look at the muscle, i.e. the meat. The papillary muscles and the chordae tendineae work together. Inside the heart, you have the valves, and the valves are basically a parachute. The valve keeps blood from flowing back where it shouldn't go, and in order to do that, you have these cords that come off of it, and the cords are going to hold the valves in place. The cords then come down to muscles in the ventricle that are going to pull those cords tight, which are going to keep the valves from blowing back up. So the papillary muscles are the names of the muscles keeping the cords tight. Okay, Thanksgiving's coming up. You want a primary example of this? I'm telling you where to look. Watch the Macy's Day Parade. And by the way, if you haven't already discovered it, taking anatomy, you'll never look at the world again the same. So watch the Macy's Day Parade. And you're going to notice that you have these big balloons, right, that are going through the streets. And the balloons aren't just left to float on their own. All the balloons have cords on them. And on the street are people holding the cords. Okay? The balloons in this case would be the valves. The cords would be the chordae tendineae. And the people holding onto those cords are the papillary muscles. And if you really want to have some fun, watch it when it's a really windy day, because those people are really holding on, okay? They're really, But those are the papillary muscles. The papillary muscles are holding those cords down so the balloon doesn't fly away. The papillary muscles in the heart are holding the cords down so the valves don't blow back. So papillary muscles are cone-shaped muscles which originate from the ventricular wall. Their apex are connected to the chordae tendineae, so the top part is connected to the cord. The chordae tendineae are fine tendinous cords which are attached from the papillary muscles to the borders of the cusp of the tricuspid valve. They prevent eversion, i.e. blowing out when the ventricles contract. The ventricles are going to be much more powerful in contraction than the atrium. And so we want to make sure those valves don't blow blood back where they shouldn't go. Okay, so we talked briefly about valves before. So let's talk about valves right now. There are two families of valves found within the heart. We have the atrioventricular valves, and we have the semilunar valves. The atrioventricular valves are going to separate the atriums from the ventricles. So atrioventricular, atrioventricular, atrium, ventricle, atrium, ventricle, atrioventricular. They separate the atriums from the ventricles. And these are the atrioventricular valves. The semilunar valves are what's going to separate the ventricles from the rest of the body. So atrioventricular, atrium from ventricles, and semilunar, ventricles from the rest of the body. So taking a look first at the AV valves, the atrioventricular valves, we just kind of call them just AV valves. We have two types. We have the mitral or bicuspid. Bi means two. So guess how many flaps they have. How many cusps? Bicuspid. Okay, 2. And then we have the tricuspid. Tri means 3. Tricycle, triceratops, 3. So guess how many cusps it has? 3. Okay. So the mitral let's try that again. The mitral or bicuspid valve. By the way, when I do that on a video, I usually edit that out, but because this is a live stream, not so much. So the mitral or bicuspid valve is going to be found between the left atrium and the left ventricle, and this has 2 cusps. And yes, if your anatomy class, like any other anatomy class I've ever seen, you need to know the names of these. So the mitral, and location by the way, the mitral valve, found between the left atrium and left ventricle, has 2 cusps, while the tricuspid valve has 3 cusps, and is found between the right atrium and right ventricle. A little way I remember this is that the right side has 3, while the left side has 2. There are more right-handed people in the world than there are left-handed people in the world. So more right-handed people, more cusps, left-handed people, less cusps. So tricuspid right side, bicuspid on the left side. Then we have the semilunar valves. The semilunar valves are found, again, between the ventricles and the rest of the body. And we have 2. We have the pulmonary valve, and we have the aortic valve. The pulmonary valve is between the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk. It has 3 cusps. And the aortic valve is between the left ventricle and the aorta and has 3 cusps. So, without going back, all valves have 3 cusps, except which valve? Give you time to think about that while I take another sip of tea. Hopefully you came up with the mitral valve, okay? So all the other valves have 3 cusps. The big difference, the only difference, is the mitral valve, which is going to have 2. So here is a little diagram, a little schematic of what's going on there. Then we have heart sounds. Heart sounds are the sounds of the valves closing. The lub-dub, 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 lub-dub is what you hear. Okay? The lub sound is made by contraction of the ventricles and closure of the tricuspid and mitral valve. What we mean by this is the ventricles are the big ones on the bottom right there, the big chambers on the bottom. When they contract, when they close up, they're going to force those valves to shut. Okay, we don't want the blood to go back into the atriums. And so when the ventricles contract, they're going to slam the door shut on the atriums. The dub sound is made by the closure of the pulmonary and aortic valves. So the valves that go to the rest of the body, when they shut, that's the dub sound. So the blood comes down from the atrium into the ventricle, and I don't know if you're going to be able to hear sound on this. I'm going to pull up this. Hopefully, there we go. Okay, I got sound going on there. What we're seeing here is blood moving. You can see the atrium filling with blood. It pushes it down into the ventricles. Whoosh. Boom. The atrium's valves close up. That's the lub sound. The blood then goes pushed out of the ventricles to the rest of the body. Here it comes. Whoosh, pushes it out. And those valves shut. That's the dub sound. Cool. All right, let's keep going. We're going to take a look at the conduction system of the heart. Let me take a look first if there's any questions here on the board that have been posted. I'm not seeing any questions as of right now that I can see. All right, moving on then. So the conduction system. Every person marches to their own beat set for them by their cardiac conduction system. The heart's a kind of cool muscle. The cardiac muscle is kind of cool in that it will eventually contract on its own. What occurs here is that we have an area that will fire first, that will release its signal first, causing the rest of the heart to contract and to go through its regular cycle. The average adult heart beats between 70 to 80 beats per minute, BPM, at rest. So if you want to check this out, hopefully you're not running around, but if you want to take a pulse, you should be able to feel a pulse and kind of do a time here. You can take it for 10 seconds and times by 6, or you want to do a quick pulse, take it for 6 seconds and times by 10. And you should have a resting beat per minute. Around 70 to 80 beats per minute is what you should probably wind up having. Funny story, several years ago, I was drinking a lot of coffee. Well, not that I don't drink a lot of coffee now, but I drank a lot of coffee and drank a lot of soda, Diet Coke, and my heart was just feeling really, really weird and wound up getting tachycardia. I didn't know what was causing it. I just knew my heart was going crazy, racing, and wound up going to the emergency room for it. And, by the way, if you ever want to get checked into the emergency room quickly, tell them you have a heart thing. You won't even fill out your paperwork before they see you, put you in the back. So I'm in the back. I got the oxygen tubes up the nose. The shirt's open. They got the things on me, the leads on me. The doctor comes over after me sitting there laying down there for 2 hours. And says, the most common cause of tachycardia is caffeine. Have you had any caffeine today? And I'm like, well, I've had a cup of coffee, 2 cups of coffee. And my wife is like, tell them how big your cups are. And the doctor gave me you're an idiot look and walked away. So, your heart rate could go up because of something like caffeine or other stimulants. So moving on. Let's talk about the musicians here. First, we have the sinoatrial node, the SA. This is the pacemaker. If you've ever watched The Simpsons and you've seen Krusty the Clown, okay, Krusty the Clown has a pacemaker. One of the episodes where Krusty was framed for murder, if you remember that, or not framed for murder, he was framed for robbing the Quickie Mart, okay? And it turned out to be Sideshow Bob. They were talking about his pacemaker and how the microwave would have raised havoc with it. The pacemaker is going to set the beat for the heart. This is going to be the one that fires first. This is going to be the one that sends the signal first for the heart to follow. So the sinoatrial node, the SA node, is the pacemaker. It's found in the walls of the right atrium. Signals from the SA node will spread to the atria, so it will spread throughout the atria. The atrioventricular node, found in the lower end of the intraatrial septum. So if the ventricular septum was between the ventricles, the intraatrial, talk about a mouthful, intraatrial septum is found between the atriums. So the atrioventricular node is found in the lower end of that septum, the electrical gateway from the atrium to the ventricles. And there is a delay there. Okay? We want there to be a delay. What occurs is the atriums are going to get the signal first. They're going to contract. They're going to push the blood down into the ventricles. Let me pull up that slide again, or that video again. And you can see we want the atriums to contract first. We want them to fire first. We want the muscles there to happen. And then we want the ventricles to go next. So the atrioventricular bundle is next, and that's also known as the bundle of His, branched to the right and left ventricle. Then we have Purkinje's fibers, which is small divisions of the bundle branches, nerve-like processes that come from the lower end of the bundle branches. They turn upward to spread through the ventricles. So that is how the conduction system of the heart works kind of in a nutshell. So that's how the signal is sent, propagates to the atrium, goes down to the ventricles, then the ventricles contract. We also have nerve supply. So even though the heart can beat on its own, which is pretty cool, what do I have? I have an image of this. I have a video of this. I'll throw up there. All right, what you're seeing here is you're seeing a heartbeat. And I don't think this heart's in any person particularly. I think this thing is floating around in a liquid on its own. And we're seeing a heartbeat on its own. It does not require nervous action. It doesn't require your brain to tell the heart to beat. So it can fire off on its own, which is pretty cool. But of course, the brain can have an impact on the heartbeat. Both the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the nervous system are going to impact the contractions of the heart. If you remember, or if you've had the nervous system, you remember that the sympathetic nervous system was fight or flight. It was, panic, scared, I got to react to something. That was sympathetic, fight or flight. You're either going to run away or fight, but something wants to hurt you, and you need to be ready. And so with the sympathetic nervous system acting upon it, you're going to increase your rate of the heartbeats. You're going to increase the rate and force of the heartbeat. Parasympathetic is the chillax branch of the nervous system. This is the part of the nervous system that is all about relaxation. It's about taking it easy. It's about having a sip of tea. You just chill, okay? And this is going to relax the heart, and this is going to come off your vagus nerve, your cranial nerve 10. So we have the cardiac cycle. And just to give you an idea of how much left we have, we're going to cover the cardiac cycle and just one or two pathologies, and we're pretty much done, okay? So we're going to put all this together. We have the cardiac cycle. The heart is a pump that moves blood through the body. The cardiac cycle is the changes that need to occur in order to achieve this mission. So depending on who you're reading, depending on your anatomy book, they can either break this down into 4 or 5 steps or even more. Ultimately, it comes down to the ventricles either filling with blood or pushing the blood out. And here we're taking a look at ventricular filling. We have diastolic and systolic. During diastole, the atrials are receiving blood from the vena cava and the pulmonary veins. The atrioventricular valves, the mitral and tricuspid, are open. Blood flows from the atrium to the ventricle. If you, and we'll talk about blood pressure, I believe, in a little bit. Diastolic is resting. Okay, it's the resting blood pressure. What's happening here is blood is just kind of coming back to the heart. Okay, it's coming back to the atrium. The door from the atrium to the ventricle are open. It's all good. Everybody's relaxed. We're just bringing in the blood. Atrial systole. Systole, the S for systole, think squeezing. So when you see systole or systolic, the S is for squeezing. The atrial systole, the SA node fires, sending a signal to the atrium to contract. So the atrium, the top part, is going to be filling with blood, and then it's going to get the order to contract. It's going to squeeze out the rest of the blood from the atrium into the ventricles. The squeeze, the more the blood into the ventricles, the AV node fires. So we've now moved the blood from the atrium to the ventricle. So the atriums have their own diastole and their own systole. The diastole, again, is the resting. It's casually filling. The systole gives a little squeeze, pushes the rest of the blood down into the ventricles. Now we're going to take a look at ventricle systole. Ventricle systole, the AV node fires. The signal travels down the AV bundle. The ventricles are now going to contract. Remember, the ventricles are more powerful than the atrium. So when the ventricles contract, the atrium have to shut their doors. And so the AV valves are going to slam shut. They're going to shut them down so the blood doesn't blow back into the atrium and you wind up dying. The chordae tendineae hold on to the flaps for dear life. They're keeping that blood from going back into the atrium. It's like the guys walking the balloons. They're holding on to those cords for dear life so Snoopy doesn't go fly off and scare the little children. So they're holding on. The increase in pressure finally causes the aortic and pulmonary valves to fly open. Something you have to remember. The valves outside of the heart have pressure on them. Specifically the aorta, okay? The aorta has blood pushing against it. You've got to get enough pressure to push that door open, okay? So the ventricles start to contract. The atrium shuts down, so it can't go that way. It builds up and builds up and builds up until it shoves the door open into the rest of the body. the blood is going to rush out of the ventricles to the lungs or to the rest of the body, depending if it's a systolic, or not systolic, but the systemic circulation or pulmonary circulation. The pressure is going to equalize, meaning that the blood is not going to be getting pushed so hard from behind anymore. It's kind of being pushed back with the same force. The valves are going to shut down to keep the blood from pushing back into the heart. Now, when the blood pushes back, the valves shut down. Some of that blood that's being pushed back goes into the cardiac blood supply. Think about this for a second. The next time you're on the road and you're driving, and you happen to see a semi-truck, a tanker carrying gas for Exxon or BP or Texaco or any gas station, where is that semi getting its gas from? Not in the tank, but to run the truck. The semi doesn't have a tube to the gas it's carrying. That semi has to go fill up at a gas station just like other semis. The same thing goes with the heart. Just because the heart is containing all this blood doesn't mean it's dipping a straw in and taking sips. The heart has to get its blood, just like all the other organs in the body, by a circulatory system. And so when the blood gets pushed out of the heart, when it kind of pushes back, some of that blood goes back into the cardiac blood supply. And that's how the heart is going to breathe, or not breathe, but get its nutrients and all that good stuff. So here's some stuff again you need to know. We have the normal heart rate, which is between 70 to 80 beats per minute, BPM. Cool fact, it'll beat over 100,000 times and move around 8,000 liters of blood a day. That's a lot. You have something called tachycardia, which is a accelerated heart rate. It's a persistent resting adult heart rate of 100 beats per minute. So this is a higher beats per minute than normal. Now, tachycardia doesn't necessarily mean bad. If you are exercising, your heart rate's going to be higher than a resting heart rate. Okay, that's why it's not a resting heart rate. If you're watching a horror movie and it's particularly scary, your heart rate will go up. Again, that's not bad. That's normal. That's the sympathetic nervous system kicking in. Then we have bradycardia. Bradycardia is the opposite. This is a persistent resting adult heart rate that is less than 60 beats per minute. So your heart rate is not as fast as a normal heart rate. Now, this is not, again, a normal health concern. Let's say that you're a seasoned athlete. You are very athletic. You do tons of cardio, all this stuff. A well-conditioned athlete's heart pumps more effective and efficient than a non-athlete. And so they could be sitting around the house, which kind of goes against the whole point of being a conditioned athlete. But let's say they're sitting around the house. Their heart rate might be less than 60 beats per minute just because it doesn't need to beat as much to get the same work done. All right, let's take a look at pathologies, and then we will call it a night. I would love your feedback, by the way. Again, this is the first time I've done this, and I've run into a couple of technical problems. Not too many, I have to say. I think the presentation could be a little bit cleaner, but I would, again, like your feedback on this. This is the first time I've done it, and I know I have a few professors out there who are interested in how this turned out. So please do leave me some comments and leave me feedback. You're not going to hurt my feelings as far as telling me what you liked about it and what you didn't like about it. So definitely please leave me some comments in the comment section. I would greatly appreciate that, and that will only help make any future presentations that much better. All right, and of course now we're going to finish this off, right? So first pathology we're going to talk about is atrial fibrillation, also known as AF or AFib. I had the honor of going, one of the advantages of living in North Virginia is that Discovery Channel's headquarters is not that far away. It's about a 30-minute to 40-minute drive depending on traffic. And they had released, and I have a link to the video, I think, in my regular videos, to one of their documentaries that they released on AFib. AFib is an irregular and usually rapid heart rate. Feels like the heart is racing. The atria beats chaotically and irregularly. People who have seen the heart, when this happens, describe it as a bag full of worms. It looks like a bag, an atrial bag is just full of worms. It's just like this, okay? Symptoms
include heart palpitations, shortness of breath. They just can't get your breath. Weakness. They're just so weak. They just can't do it. And it also may be asymptomatic, which is not good because they may not know this is happening to them. And it's very hard to diagnose because typically when it happens, by the time they get to the doctor, it's not happening anymore. So they might have to wear, the tricorder bag, from the old Star Trek. What this is, it's got leads on them, and it's recording their heart rate over a period of hours. Now, here's the bad part about this. Here's the really, really bad part about AFib. It greatly increases the risk of stroke. And we're not talking a double increase. We're not talking about a slight increase. We're talking about if you have AFib and it doesn't go treated, there is a really good chance you're going to have a stroke. It's like 5 times more possible to have a stroke. And not to make it even worse, not only do you have an increased chance of having a stroke, but if you do have a stroke, it's going to be even worse than somebody who has a normal stroke. Not that a stroke can be normal, but this is going to be even worse. So it increases your risk of stroke a lot, and the severity of the stroke will be very, very bad. Cardiac tamponade. This is an increase of pressure on the heart due to a buildup of fluid within the pericardial sac. Okay, remember we talked about the sac, and we had that cavity in between filled with fluid. What happens here, excuse me, what happens here is we have an increased pressure on the heart, the buildup of fluid. So we're getting a fluid buildup, which is pushing against the heart. Now think about this. The heart's a muscle. It contracts, it opens. It contracts, it expands, it contracts, it expands. If you start pushing down on the heart, it can't really go anywhere, okay? And so the more pressure you put on the heart, the less able it is to pump the blood. It can include hypothyroidism, trauma, end-stage lung cancer, heart attack, heart surgeries, and pericarditis, to name a few. Some of the symptoms, and I'm pulling this from the NIH, National Institute of Health, can be anxiety or restlessness. You have this feeling that there's something wrong. You just have this floating anxiety, like there's something wrong. There's, I don't feel good. There's, kind of a thing, right? Chest pain, radiating to the neck, shoulders, back, or abdomen, sharp stabbing, worsened by deep breathing or coughing. Kind of makes sense. You breathe in deep, and you've got something pushing on you, it's going to hurt. Coughing, the same thing. You increase intrathecal pressure, you cause your heart to do that fun stuff, and you're going to feel the pain. Difficulty breathing, discomfort sometimes relieved by sitting upright or leaning forward. Fainting, lightheadedness, pale gray or blue skin, palpitations, rapid breathing, swelling of the abdomen, and other areas. Another one is congestive heart failure. Congestive heart failure is very personal for me. This is how my grandmother eventually passed away. Occurs when the heart does not pump out all the blood it should. What occurs here is the heart's just not getting out all the blood. It's having some remaining blood. It's not moving it. The pump is failing. The pump is weaker. It's not getting out what it needs to get out. The pumping power is weaker than it should be. Signs and symptoms: shortness of breath with exercise, or difficulty breathing at rest or when lying flat in bed. I remember my grandmother, she used to have to sleep sitting up, okay? When she would lay down flat on her back, she would, she couldn't breathe right, and so she always had to be propped up. We had something like 5 or 6 pillows in her bed so she could sleep basically almost sitting up. There's a dry, hacking cough or wheezing. They have a cough, and if you ever heard a person coughing, for example, I've got the 2 boys whose oldest is now 9, and a 6-year-old. It's the time for the colds, and so when they're coughing, it's a productive cough. You hear the phlegm, that fluidy, nasty, phlegmy, mommy, can I stay home cough. With people with congestive heart failure, it's a dry cough. It's a very dry cough or wheeze. Edema, this is a building up of fluid, so their legs might get filled up with fluids. It might be pitting edema where you push in and it leaves a mark. Loss of appetite or nausea, dizziness, fatigue, or weakness. If they sit up too quickly, they can, have issues and plop back down. They can tire very easily. They get weakness very easily. It can cause confusion, and it can cause regular or rapid heart rates. I learned how to listen to heart sounds actually on my grandmother who had congestive heart failure. And I'm telling you what, if you can find a heartbeat on these folks, a regular lub-dub, 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 you can find it in anybody. Because it is the most bizarre sound. They don't have the regular cycle. It's sometimes bum, 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 bum. It's really wild. So that's congestive heart failure. And then our last one are the dreaded murmurs. Well, not so much dreaded all the time. Basically, you have an extra or strange sound heard during a heartbeat. They can range from soft to loud. It can be a swishing or a whooshing noise. It can be innocent or abnormal. It could be normal. Somebody could have a heart murmur for their entire life and no big deal. I have a functional heart murmur myself. It's no biggie. I think the only thing I have to do is notify a dentist beforehand if I'm going to get any work done on my teeth. That's pretty much it. Abnormal could be bad. Innocent murmurs are common in children. So if you are working on your medical world there and you want to listen to your heart's heart rate, don't freak out if you hear a murmur. Again, it's normal in children. In that case, I would just suggest bringing it up at the next checkup. Abnormals may have signs and symptoms of other heart pathologies. So that, ladies and gentlemen out there, is going to conclude our very first live stream on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed it. I would very much appreciate your feedbacks in the comment section. I'm just seeing something. Apparently, I scared a cat out there. I apologize. I think my cat's hiding somewhere right now as well. But again, I really would love your feedback on this. First time I've done this, I know I've got some other professors who are probably looking at this and seeing if they can do it in their class. You're not going to hurt my feelings, again, if this is constructive criticism. If it's comments like, why'd you shave off your goatee? Or, yeah, it's growing back. But again, thank you very much for joining us. Have a great time out there. Be sure to check out the rest of our videos on the Mr. Ford's Class channel on YouTube. And we also have the MrFordsClass.net. Until the next time we meet, have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful night, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.